Robert Lewis, MD, will begin our tribute today by placing in historical context the influences that shaped Al Lowen's work and the institute he created, and looking back to better see where we are today. Now, Robert Lewis, Bob, as we know him, is uniquely qualified to undertake this task. He's in private practice here in New York, is a senior trainer on the IIBA faculty, and he's a member of the clinical faculty of the NYU Mount Sinai Medical Center. The bioenergetic community has been a second family to Bob since the early 1960s. He's published extensively on the integration of early developmental and relational issues into the basic bioenergetic approach. His work with what he terms cephalic shock, preceded by many years the focus on trauma that currently pervades the psychotherapy field. Bob leads workshops in Europe, in the Americas, and residential intensives on Long Island, New York. So I present to you Bob Lewis.
I also would like to thank Hugo, Virginia, Ed, and Bill White for all they did to make this possible, and Barbara Rendell, Ron Panvini, and probably other people that I should be mentioning. I'm going to ask you for some patience with my habit of referring to Al at times as Al Lowen, at times as Al, and maybe even at times as Lowen or Dr. Lowen, depending on what feels right in the flow of my talk. I've never figured out how to do that consistently. I am deeply touched that the committee asked me to give this part of our two-day memorial to Al. I understand that it made sense to the committee to ask me to do this because, along with Alice Lattis and Vivian Goose, I am one of the few who are still here that were actually present around 1960, give or take a couple of years, when our institute was very young, and when Al and John Pierrakos and Bill Walling began to hold their Tuesday evening clinical seminars in New York. Al's first book had just come out, and there was a sense of excitement and great things to come. I will be talking about the evolving models of health in which Freud, Reich, and Lowen believed, and from which they derived their understanding of illness and therapy. I will also talk about the actual behavior regarding clinical theory and practice, which the three men modeled for us. The actual behavior they modeled being, I would argue, at least as instructive as the models about which they spoke. The title I was asked to speak on, quote, Freud, Reich, Lowen, and Historical Perspective, end quote, is interesting both for what it says and for what it does not say. It honors the pioneering and enduring genius of the three men. It also omits the rich context of ideas, debates, and discoveries from colleagues and from other disciplines from which the three men benefited and borrowed in the process of creatively synthesizing their clinical theories. I am also suggesting that this rich context and bioenergetics as an evolving work in progress continues, even as without its dynamic leader, it has of necessity morphed into a community of brothers and sisters. It may be still a bit soon to put Al Lowen in a historical perspective. His loss is still fresh, and the witness and testimony of the next 2 days will probably give us a sense of the regard in which he is held by us. But like many of us who knew the man, he both gave me, this is me speaking personally, precious gifts and at times I was disappointed by him. Personally, he was a father figure to me, a leader, teacher, mentor, and therapist. I especially treasured the bright light of his clarity and certainty during years when I had lost my way and feared life's darkness. As I have said, we are looking back today to honor Al Lowen and in the process, hopefully, to better find our way forward. Most of us would agree that if bioenergetics can be called a science, it is a very subjective one, for which compelling empirical proofs are hard to come by. Consequently, a central issue for our institute is the extent to which we will become defined by a closed system of thought, free from dissent, and unified by our loyalty to a charismatic leader whom we are here today to honor. Or will we, as was clearly modeled by Freud, Reich, and Lowen himself, feel free when exceptions and contradictions and empirical data challenge the explanatory power of our existing clinical hypotheses? Will we feel free to question said hypotheses? Interestingly, the three brilliant, charismatic men I've just mentioned, perhaps possessing a trait of brilliant, charismatic men in general, did not make a habit of stating that the cutting edge of their basic theoretical and clinical views were actually hypotheses awaiting empirical confirmation. If they did so, somehow the force of their personalities endowed tentative ideas with the aura of delivered truths. The three, each in their own way, psychosomatically exuded an air of certainty, even as they were actually living in the question, exploring and discovering. Over the years, as a disciple, for instance, struggling to find my own truths, I remember being startled by hearing Al say at various points along the way, quote, "If only I knew then what I know now," end quote. Certainly, it had been important to me that he know the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And it took a long time before I realized, when Al said something with certainty, that at a later date he might revise it as he learned more. Charisma and self-doubt probably do not travel well together. This having been said, Al set an example for all of us in how he both remained deeply true to his Reichian roots and still found his own way. He was both deeply loyal to Reich and yet did not canonize or mummify Reich's teachings, but rather infused them with his own inspiration and his own creative center. In this regard, Al recounts that he was reluctant to identify more fully with the group of orgone therapists around Reich because, Al tells us, they had developed an, quote, almost fanatical devotion to him and his work. It was considered presumptuous, if not heretical, to question any of his statements or modify his concepts in the light of one's own experience. It was clear to me that such an attitude would stifle any original or creative work. These considerations dictated that I maintain an independent position. That's the end of that quote. Al tells us of a sudden realization that turns out to have been foundational for us later-day bioenergeticists. Quote, "Another Reichian therapist, Dr. Pelletier, who was outside the official circles, opened my eyes to the possibility of modifying or extending Reich's technical procedures. Reich had stressed that my jaw should hang loose in an attitude of letting go. Dr. Pelletier observed that he had found it helpful to have patients stick their jaws out in an attitude of defiance. Of course, I realized, this is Al talking, of course, it would work either way, and suddenly I felt free to question or change what Reich did." End of the quote. The rest, as they say, is history. Al systematized character analysis, extending Reich's theory to all the different character types. He further delineated the character dynamics psychologically and physically and described their libidinal connections. Al developed expressive exercises and got his patients onto their feet, developing the basic bioenergetic concept, as you all know, of grounding. I know that Al set an example for me when the time came that I no longer needed him to protect me from the high pedestal on which I had put him, and I in turn had to find a voice to express my unique bioenergetic truth. As we look back, I also want to focus on that part of our journey under Al's leadership during the last 3 or 4 decades. I am suggesting that as an institute, we can best honor Al by following his example. That is, to engage in the ongoing challenge of remaining true to our bioenergetic roots without rigidifying the truths they hold such that we are no longer a living body of artisans. As Al modeled for us, we can reach for a bioenergetic institute that moves from and is inspired by both by what Al inherited from Reich, what he added to the bioenergetic work in progress, and what we each in turn bring to it. Neither Freud, nor Reich, nor Lowen were known for being especially supportive of colleagues whose views differed from theirs. But I would suggest that in his own special way, Al Lowen tolerated much more varied and rich contributions from his junior colleagues than did either Freud or Reich. Because of his complex relationship to Reich and the way he could not share his self-appointed role, in my opinion, as the standard bearer of Reich's insights, Al was not often able to publicly affirm, especially in print, the contributions of his junior bioenergeticists. However, many of us were struck how in private moments he could be deeply affirming of the value of our work. And I would argue, similar to what Scott suggested, that as I speak, our institute today, indeed because of our imperfections and lack of homogenization, is a tribute to something vital that directly or indirectly we were given by Al. In a keynote address in 1996, Al spoke candidly about how he struggled with this issue. Although I am no scholar of either of the 3 men, I have not come across anything indicating that either Freud or Reich were as aware of the personal motivations that colored their quality of leadership, as was Al when he shared the following quote with us 13 years ago. He said, "I took a big step towards freedom when I announced at my 85th birthday party that I was resigning as executive director of the IIBA. I had felt for many years that many members of the international faculty were not focused on the energetic or physical issues of the patient's problem as I believed they should be. Whether I was right or wrong is not important. Why did I need them to do it my way? Why did I need them to follow me? I think that the Institute gave me a sense of support and power that would enable me to prove that I could save the world. In this, I shared some of Reich's messianic ideas and some of his megalomania and insecurity." End of this quote. In this room today and in our institute at large, I, Bob Lewis, thank God that we do not all see things the same way. There may be those who feel that they practice a version of bioenergetics that is truer and more loyal to Al's fundamental vision. Others, like myself, still believe we are true members of the Guild, even though we incorporate into our clinical work ways of understanding and being with patients which were not Al's ways. What I do hope that we all share, and what Scott Baum described as foundational in his recent inaugural presidential message to us, is a commitment to keeping our patients and our own somatopsychic unity or lack of it at the heart of our clinical encounters. This was Reich's enduring gift to us, the functional identity of a person's character and his bodily attitude. I'm using the masculine pronoun, forgive me, for simplicity. So this was Reich's enduring gift to us, and it will not go out of style. The committee, in recommending that I give this talk, reminded me several times that, quote, "you were there." I understand that the hope embodied in this phrase is that I was alive and breathing, however shallowly, around the time when bioenergetics began, and that I can therefore convey to you some essence that may no longer be with us. Clearly, that essence was about the tremendous vitality and hope that Al inspired in those of us who were in his presence. His sparkling blue eyes, a resonant timbre in his voice, and the sureness of his touch and words. His was the stuff of psychosomatic charisma. His inner fire burned bright. You have any questions? I'm waiting for a thunderbolt.
It will be forever known as the Lewis Heresy.
For a church. Add to this the loving synergy that moved between Al and John Pirakos at the informal Tuesday night clinical seminars, and it was indeed a special time in the young life of bioenergetics. While my having been there and sharing this early excitement with you is important, I want to suggest that something less obvious is equally important. That something is that I was there and I am still here. The fact that 50 years later I still think of myself as an active member of our bioenergetic community speaks directly to a special kind of legacy that has grown while Al was our leader. During the past 50 years, many clinicians have come to bioenergetics and left the fold after a while, usually having been enriched by Lowen the man and his teachings, even while they needed to move out from under his roof. As I increasingly found my own voice, there were several times when I thought that if I did not move out myself, Al might invite me to do so. But he did not, and I am still here. I suspect I may be speaking for many of us who are still here and who spoke with their own voices while under Al Lowen's tent. When I say that there was something about Al's tolerance of our contributions that has made possible the vitality of our institute, forgive me for mentioning only 3 among many examples of this vitality. First, our revised state-of-the-art 2005 bioenergetic training curriculum put together by Violaine de Klerk, Guy Tonella, and Odila Weigand. Second, the clinical treasures in the bioenergetic reader that came out last year, put together under Vida Heinrich's leadership. And third, the exciting work that continues to come out in our journal, currently edited by Vincentia Schroeder, Margaret Comeda, and May Nascimento. We are indeed a worldwide bioenergetic community that lives, breathes, and pulsates. While, as I have mentioned, in his role as bearer of the Reichian standard, Al did not often cite the contributions of the generations of bioenergeticists who followed him. Who knows how many of us are still here because we have touching stories of how Al more privately let us see and hear his approval and even pride in our creative contributions. Let us take a closer look at the background from which Lowen's bioenergetics emerged. Most of you will be happy to know that Freud's intellectual debts to Aristotle, Darwin, Hegel, Ernst Haeckel, Hughlings-Jackson, Charcot, and many of his own circle are beyond the range of this talk. For our purposes today, in the late 1890s, Freud shockingly called attention to the hidden force of human sexuality. as the cause of psychoneurosis. In his early formulations, seduction and the resulting trauma were central ingredients. All neurosis had a sexual etiology, a disturbance in the energy of the sexual drive, which Freud called libido. Initially, for Freud, this was a physical energy, which, when interfered with by unhealthy sexual practices, led to neurasthenia and anxiety neurosis. Shortly after 1900, Freud progressively moved away from seduction and trauma and from a physical energy as central to the etiology of psychoneurosis. The point for us is that psychoanalysis became increasingly a psychology of ideas concerned with the contents of the mind. Along this path, Freud revised his model of the mind several times, finally giving aggression equal status with libido in his dual drive theory. The scale of the carnage of the Great War of World War I had made it clear that men's destructive instincts could not be adequately explained by a sexual drive. Enter Wilhelm Reich, to whom we owe the foundation of bioenergetic analysis. It's quite a challenge to read this in between the Reich. We owe to him the functional identity and antithesis of mind and body. At the age of 27, he took over the technical seminar in Vienna and pioneered the treatment of character neurosis as requiring consistent focus on resistance and transference. His emphasis was on the latent negative transference. Expanding on the work of Abraham and Alexander, Reich had made character a primary focus of psychoanalytic treatment. But while he clinically sought out the hidden negative transference, Reich understood these latent hatreds as the result of sexual repression. He felt that Freud had made a terrible mistake in positing a biologically driven death instinct. This abstract theory, Reich felt, could be used to justify inept treatment. Indeed, Freud's outlook had become increasingly pessimistic. Not only was there an inherent drive to suffer, but repression and sublimation of instinctual gratification were givens if one was to successfully adapt to society. As Freud put it, a successful psychoanalysis could do no more than replace neurotic misery with ordinary human unhappiness. That's one of his famous quotes, which he may indeed have said. Reich's position, Reich was 41 years younger than Freud, was quite the opposite. He viewed all anxiety as resulting from repressed libido, and he became increasingly involved in vigorous attempts at societal and political reforms. It was Reich's hope to create conditions that would foster a guilt-free genitality in the younger generation and the working classes. In The Mass Psychology of Fascism, he describes the connections between sexual repression, fear of freedom, and submission to authority. Reich picked up and never gave up on Freud's early understanding of a physical sexual energy as the cause of illness. He considered this the legacy from Freud which underlay his life's work, the energy principle, what he called the quantitative factor, and which years later Lowen identified as one of the 5 basic bioenergetic principles. Which leads us at last to did I lose some power here? No. Okay, which leads us at last to... Is it okay now? Turn this? On the right? This one? It's tight. This way. This way. Great. Okay, thank you. That was just when I was getting to orgastic potency, too. I'm sorry about that. It's a very charged topic, we said. Where was I? Orgastic potency, as opposed to Freud's unhappy vision, became Reich's criterion of health. He never relinquished his belief that health was synonymous with this capacity to discharge the organism's excess energy in the total body involuntary convulsive experience. But over time, he also became less optimistic about what therapy could accomplish, and he used the metaphor of not being able to straighten out a tree once it had been bent. He devoted himself increasingly to laboratory research and believed that change would be a gradual process. He was hopeful for the, quote, unborn child of future generations. Now, if you think the matter, this is me now, of defining what healthy sexuality is, has proved easy, listen to what Al Lowen says. Of course, Reich is the only one who really defines sexual health. The problem with Reich's definition is that the idea of orgastic potency, as he describes it, is a state that is very, very difficult for any human being to really achieve. Not that it is not real, but human beings, because of splits in their personality, which follow from a culture that does not support health, cannot fully give over to the sexual feelings. End of quote. So realizing this, as he developed bioenergetics, Lowen de-emphasized orgastic potency and stressed instead the development of a healthy, mature personality as the goal of therapy. The sexuality of a mature individual was an expression of love. But a loving sexuality was only one of the ways in which an individual expressed himself. The main criterion of health became the ability to fully express oneself. However, to achieve this goal, the personality problems had to be worked through thoroughly. Lowen stated clearly that neither his own character analysis nor the physical work with Reich had gone far enough. There were no shortcuts. Draining the excess energy from the neurotic character, removing the biopathy, could not be done without also thoroughly working through the psychosomatic details of that character structure. And then there was the culture. I think it is accurate to say that in the last 20 years or so of his active career, Lowen became quite sober about the potential of even the best bioenergetic therapy to restore health as he defined it. If I understand him, Lowen, in substantial agreement with Reich, viewed the outcome of the familial Oedipal triangle as more or less crippling for most people in our culture. The child was not able to grow naturally out of his or her passionate feelings for the parent of the opposite sex and his jealous and competitive feelings for the parent of the same sex, because the whole complex was so threatening that it had to be repressed. This was the case because neither parent was sufficiently secure in themselves or their relationship to each other, so their own guilt, fear, and hatred were projected onto their children. And this situation was traced back by Lowen to the time in our civilization when mankind gained power over nature, and patriarchal values of power and success began to dominate the matriarchal values of mystery, surrender, and oneness with the body. Thus, for Lowen, paradoxically, maintaining health is a lifelong struggle to stop struggling and to find the wisdom to surrender to failure. Lowen writes eloquently and in great depth about these issues in Fear of Life, which he considered his most important book. Few of us would argue that one can straighten trees once they are bent, or that ours is a culture that supports health. Further, I believe it is in the healthy nature of things that the older people become, the more they learn that they can do less to change things than they believed they could when they were at the height of their powers. Perhaps the wisest among us are able, as Lowen taught, to sufficiently accept our impotence and to change in spite of ourselves. Having said this, although I am getting older, I am obviously not wise enough to let things be, and would like to suggest another issue that may have contributed to that part of the legacy left to us by these three men that concerns the limitations of therapy. All three of these giants, especially Reich and Lowen, believed that infancy was a crucial time of life. But in their theory, and especially In their clinical presence and quality of contact, I suggest that somehow they were so focused on Oedipal sexuality that some of the issues which we have just mentioned as belonging to the matriarchy were relatively neglected. Notwithstanding the cultural dominance of left brain functions and ego values, which Lowen saw as destructive, recent decades have seen a resurgence of interest in and respect for the right brain and its implicit realm, especially in our field. Recent empirical research, for instance, documents how early attunement to and respect for both the unique bodily rhythms and the unique quality of mind of the developing infant codes for its basic security of self well before the Oedipal drama unfolds. Recently, Elaine Tusillo and Diana Guest, members of our own institute, have offered a needed relational model of healthy sexual development and a model for working less judgmentally with the actual sexual realities of our patients' lives. One can hope that this clinical research may help us better understand the basic insecurities of self that are traumatized by the powerful force of sexuality. So I am suggesting that these three men, being men, as great as they were, not surprisingly bequeathed us models that could use a touch more matriarchy. A little more mystery in the model, for instance. I mean by this a therapeutic model that assumes, even though we are armed with our Reichian Rosetta Stone, assumes that the patient has an inner life and mind which we can at best read with difficulty. Having said this, I will borrow from Gary Cockburn's recent paper in our journal. Gary himself, borrowing from the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, suggested that one does well to search the works of genius for unexamined meanings. So I propose that there is a relational aspect embedded in Reich's and Lowen's models, which neither of them explicitly examined as fully as they might have, but is nonetheless implicitly present. It is to be found in Reich's description of what he called the genital embrace, and is the germ of the more heartfelt and relationally aware model of sexuality that was developed by Lowen and those that have followed him. This chapter, very unique to the rest of Reich's writings, is from The Murder of Christ, his book, and I'm indebted to the late Mickey Frank for calling our attention to it in the IIBA Journal of Spring 1993. This is the flavor of the beautiful chapter for those of you who may not have run across it. This is Reich. It takes many months, sometimes years, to learn to know your love partner in the body. The finding of the body of the beloved one itself is gratification of the first order. This search itself and the mutual wordless finding one's way into the beloved's sensations and truly cosmic quivering is pure delight, clean like water in a mountain brook. This heartwarming, continuous experience of love and contact and mutual surrender and body delight is the decent bondage which goes with every naturally growing marriage. The genital embrace does not differ basically from any other life activity, be it of great or little importance. Full living means surrender to any kind of functioning. So from that last couple of sentences, I would suggest that Reich is telling us the embrace of which he speaks is of life itself. Marriage, he continues briefly here, marriage has to grow slowly from the seedling towards the fruit, and it takes years to bear a fruit-bearing tree, to grow a fruit-bearing tree. The growing itself, the constant experience of a new step, the discovery of a new kind of look, the revelation of another feature in the partner's makeup, no matter whether pleasant or unpleasant, in itself is great delight. It keeps you moving, and it keeps your face capable of flushing at the right moment. End of Reich's quote. Now, for me, reading Reich's chapter reminded me of the experience I had standing near some massive blocks of marble that were unfinished sculptures of human figures by Michelangelo. I remember being stunned by the power of these human forms emerging from the inert stone. If you can forgive me for stretching my analogy here, I feel that Reich was capturing an essence of intimacy, dwelling with his words, in his words, quivering with the slowly revealed, unknown other. His genius here foretells our current understanding of a cornerstone of the health-giving relationship, both of parent to child and therapist to patient. On the one hand, mutual moments of merger via attunement to and respect for the natural rhythms of each other, and on the other, the delight, as Reich puts it, of discovery when the inner life, dare we even say the mind of the intimate other, reveals itself to us, to our attentiveness, in a look or the suggestion of a gesture. Now, returning to our honoree, Al he gave us a model of relationship which was based on his life experience. He often used the word guide to describe the role of therapist. What did he mean by that? Al was in therapy with Reich for approximately 2.5 years. From 1945, when that therapy stopped, until approximately 2005, a full 60 years later, what Al actually modeled for us, I would suggest, was a therapeutic journey without a therapist. Although his therapy with Reich had been tremendously important, Al tells us that he soon realized he had not gone very deeply or deeply enough into his issues. I believe Al's teaching, wisdom, and legacy to us were about what he did for most of his life. His central passion was about healing the mind-body split, and his chosen path to this goal was his own self-exploration. In this exploration, there was essentially no therapist other than himself. In some ways, I'm elaborating the obvious, but please forgive me for it. In the process, he gave us the gift of a passionate exploration of and a brilliant illumination of the endless facets of the mind's, body's unity and duality of function. He did this arguably as not even Reich had done, and less arguably as no one after him will likely do. So I'm suggesting that Al was guiding us through what was the larger reality of his life. In his model of the therapeutic relationship, the therapist offered what Al had found for himself, an understanding of the blocks to the natural motility and expressiveness of the mind-body, in its tissues, organs, and organism as a whole, and as it related to deep emotion and experience of self in illness and health. What he wrote about the therapeutic relationship reflected the truth of his personal struggle and movement towards more health. Al states candidly in his writing that bioenergetic analysis has been an elaboration of his own search for a satisfying, meaningful, and healthy life. His passion was in this search, and no therapist other than himself accompanied him. Consequently, Lowenian bioenergetics does not dwell on the details of a therapeutic relationship which Al did not have, but rather about his search for a unifying resonance between a trillion cells of psyche-soma. It is possible, but not likely, that someone will emerge from among us post-Lowenian bioenergeticists who will be able to lead us with the force of certainty about his truth that emanated from Freud, Reich, and Lowen himself. It is not likely that anyone will soon match Al's passion for or genius at knowing a person in and from the pulse of their body. Nor, for that matter, will anyone soon convey the same force of personality that Freud, Reich, and Lowen brought to the clinical encounter. It will be interesting to see what kind of therapeutic outcomes and unforeseen partnerships may arise as our patients sense that even though we do the best we can to read in their psychisoma the person that they are, we cannot see into their deepest recesses with the same conviction in the clarity of our vision. Sensing that we need help to unveil the mystery that they are, our patients may have to engage with us in a slow, implicit, mutual process of discovery, not unlike that which Reich captures in his description of the genital embrace. Finally, on his odyssey, Al left us many treasures. I don't know if this is also true for some of you, but it has been, for me, so many years since I was first exposed to Al's way of sensing and understanding what is going on energetically in the tissues of a patient's body, that this sensing has become second nature to me. Consequently, it is all too easy for me to forget that even if it is out of my conscious awareness, Al's legacy is part of how I am in the room with my patient and is coloring my interventions on a daily basis. From among endless clinical gems, I just want to share one vignette in which Al's gift guided me into an intense experience of connection. Quite a few years ago, probably watching Al do a demonstration, Al put his hand over the left chest of the patient and commented that one could make pretty direct contact with the patient's heart. I found the comment both obvious and startlingly powerful. As you know, that was often a signature quality of his comments. So a few months ago, I was working with a 50-year-old male patient, and my hands found their way over his left chest. This happened every now and then over some time, and my patient always found some deep kind of comfort in it. A few months prior, it had triggered a deep experience of his melting into a loving feeling, which was totally new to him. This time, however, it led to him feeling a barrier covering his heart, and he said angrily, "I'm not going to give you what you want. I'm not cooperating. I'll do it when I'm ready." He then followed this by saying, "But I do value what you are doing. Don't give up on me. I don't want to be left alone." He then said to me, "You must be a valuable human being. I've always thought of you more as a very good therapist." I said, "Perhaps you are also a valuable human being." After a silence, he said, "Doing this kind of work must be quite moving for you." I said, "Yes, it is." Our words do not quite capture this man's soul coming to the surface of his being and enveloping us in its poetry. Al Lowen, via bioenergetic analysis, gave me and us this and similar kinds of clinical now moments in which we are privileged to directly touch the living body such that we unveil the grace of self. I'm borrowing on the theme of the Brazil conference. You have to forgive me for that. So my last, finally, 3-4 lines. Reich and Lowen were inspired by a vision of the human organism as part of a pulsing, energetic continuum, a continuum whose patterns ranged from the subcellular through the organismic, orgastic sexual embrace, and out into the spiraling nebulae in the cosmos. Most of us treasure this legacy. It inspires us, even as we struggle to stay grounded in its presence. I thank you.